It may not feel like it, but as all inherently unstable systems eventually must, both mainstream masculinity and the US are currently collapsing. These two systems are so interconnected that they share structure, meaning neither can exist without the other. The collapse of both is extremely dangerous, for the same reason that while a spinning top is stable, when it starts to lose momentum, it begins to dramatically bounce around. Destabilizing systems become more violent. Count on these systems grasping power and causing escalating harm in ways that will be horrifying. And remember that this is a function of their collapse and their loss of power. The US is not able to fulfill the most basic roles of government, such as protection of the environment, protection from exploitation, balanced systems of accountability, reasonable infrastructure, education and public safety, never mind healthcare. The US has been failing for a while, but with the incoming administration of all billionaires, we can count on the last vestiges of the US crumbling pretty rapidly. So it's accurate to call the US a failed state. Identically, mainstream masculinity has been failing to meet the needs of anybody for a long time. Mainstream masculinity makes men isolated, depressed, and wounded in a million ways, which make both our lives and the lives of everyone around us miserable. It's a failed concept of gender, and now it's collapsing. The US has been occupying the space of a government on Turtle Island for 400, 500 years, and mainstream masculinity has been occupying the space of a gender in our culture for a couple thousand. Both these spaces need to be cleared for healthier expressions of government and gender to fully express, so the collapse of these systems is healthy and necessary. And the collapse of both will come with unspeakable harm. So it's not exactly a cause for rejoicing. The trajectory of this current collapse of mainstream masculinity in the US is horrifying. Men online are proudly telling women that they will be sent to Trump's breeding camps at Mar-a-Lago. High school boys are screaming, "Your body, my choice," at young women. The incoming president is threatening to take over sovereign nations around the world. That's the future they're dreaming of, and they may achieve some parts of it. So anyone cheering as they recognize that these dystopian systems are collapsing lacks an embodied awareness of what that collapse may entail. This is no more a cause for rejoicing than the need to amputate a limb. We're already seeing the emergence of brown shirts, organized groups of fascists who support the rise of fascism and are not held accountable to law. The things that they're working on now, like crushing TikTok and overturning marriage equality, are the wild, desperate acts of a regime that knows its grasp is slipping. The imminent defunding of the last threadbare social systems in the US is a triple win for the corporations. Number one, defunding things that help people gives corporations more money. The post office being crushed means that FedEx and UPS will make billions. Two, social systems such as well-funded education, healthcare, housing, and so on all create upward class mobility. With well-funded social systems, poor people can do better than their parents. By crushing those systems, billionaires are locking the class system into place. Upward mobility will be virtually impossible. And three, defunding all the systems of support and things that actually help people while driving wages ever lower makes people more desperate. And desperate people are easier to drive towards fascism. To understand this, remember that Mussolini, who invented the word fascism, said that it should be more accurately called corporatism. Fascism is a system of corporate control of the government under the public leadership of one charismatic leader, while blaming all of society's woes on minority scapegoats. So privatizing everything from education to healthcare is already movement in that direction, and it creates circumstances which lead more people to support going further in that direction. It's a disease. And it's a disease that grows simultaneously with mainstream masculinity. The enforcement and internalization of artificial social hierarchies, personal and cultural traumatization, which leads to dissociation from emotions and which preempts empathy and leads men to both cause harm directly and not just tolerate but actively celebrate harm on systematic scales. An appropriation of sacrifice for corporations rather than community health, all the things that define Western masculinity today are structurally aligned with the rise of fascism. The more tied to these systems we are, as they destabilize and collapse, the more harm we will both suffer and cause. This is true in the structural sense and in the ideological sense, but the ideological sense is by far the most important. Trying to get away from the collapsing structure of the US without healing from the ideological wounds that we've all internalized from that system is guaranteed to lead us to recreate the same problems we're fleeing elsewhere. A father building an off-grid cabin to try and save his family from the collapse of the US without addressing his internalized misogyny and white supremacy is simply trapping his family alone with the demons he's trying to protect them from, and cutting them off from the support necessary for all of them to heal. So fascism is more accurately called corporatism, and now the corporate billionaires are moving into the White House to steal and privatize every penny they can find from everything that actually helps people in this country, while using the US military to try and create an even more explicit global empire. That's horrible, and I hope they're stopped. And unless we do the work of healing masculinity, then stopping the current expression is essentially meaningless. Best case scenario, it hands power back to the Democrats, who are just as committed to corporate control, albeit on a slightly longer timescale and with slightly less immediately dehumanizing policies. So my 2 cents is that we need to separate from these collapsing systems as much as we possibly can. The part of our mind that is still in the mainstream masculine US individualistic way of thinking will hear that and think it means we need to protect our own, stockpile, prep, run away. I get it. I have the same fantasies. I give them a breath and let them go. That's not what separating from these harmful collapsing systems means. Separating from these systems means forming community. For us men, it means working together towards mutual healing. Now is a great time for men's groups. If you're a guy, then men you know have similar fears and concerns, and you will be stronger together. If you want suggestions on how to start a men's group, what to do in one, group reading suggestions, it's all on my website, all for free. Figure out how to both offer meaningful support and also receive meaningful support, which is often harder for guys. This work scales from the internal all the way up to community. I don't know what this work looks like for you, but just as an example, I learned to heal my own traumas and show up to my marriage in healthier ways. And I've also organized with men in my town so that we have a group chat on Signal for emergency immediate response to dangerous people, like brown shirts. Every scale. Healing my traumas is opposing fascism. Having a bunch of guys who are ready to respond to brown shirts in our town is healing masculinity. Every scale. Again, the point here isn't my individual story, but several years ago, both my wife and I intentionally separated our income streams from the crumbling wage salary system. There's more on this in the next video. But at the same time, we stretched way beyond our means with nothing but a cosigner to buy 25 acres on a lake. That's not some individualistic escape plan. We immediately started creating small off-grid housing that we offer for free to people we want to build community with and making it available for community gatherings and events. The housing we can offer in particular is setting our community up to invest in much larger systems and resources in the near future. We're networked with mutual support, and that's growing. I don't live in typical male isolation. That took intention and work. Our house is busy, and rarely just my wife and I. As I write this, there's a bunch of people laughing uproariously in the other room in their monthly community conflict practice space. These are the systems and communities and practices that we're investing in, which can absorb and redirect the energy of the collapsing US and mainstream masculinity. My wife calls it countergrowth. Even though we're very poor and went into a lot of debt to do this, we feel rich because we have community and time. That's what we achieve by separating from the collapsing systems. Again, the point isn't that your life or work should look like mine, but as you recognize that the US is a failed state and mainstream masculinity is a failed concept of gender, this is your invitation to get off. Get off of these self-destroying systems of escalating US corporate fascism and mainstream masculinity. Both will only harm you and your family. And the work of addressing and healing these wounds, and the wounds of those systems, is both immensely gratifying and also builds powerful networks of community. Like being a real man, the US is an idea. Both these ideas have always been lies intended to sell us a system that was never for our benefit. So let's set them down. The US and mainstream masculinity are collapsing. Their collapse will involve horrible harm all over the world. And we live in a time of change, and there's real power and potential in that, if we can recognize and claim our agency. Our ability to recognize and claim our agency is shaped by what we can imagine. This is where the power of stories comes in. There's a reason the Pentagon keeps an unholy alliance with Hollywood to shape media, and breaking outside of what's available to stream is a great way to start seeing more reality and more clearly, and imagining healthier worlds. If you haven't read them, I recommend both Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents series, and also Starhawk's The Fifth Sacred Thing and City of Refuge series. Both are prescient works that offer insight into the trajectory we're currently on and some pathways forward. Butler predicted everything that's happening today, and Starhawk painted pathways for wounded men in the healing of the world that tear my heart out. May we all break out of these collapsing systems. May we all see clearly enough to minimize their harm as they go. May we all work together to create healthier systems which are both much older and much newer into a world beyond any of our imagining.